Hello and welcome to Book Talk. And I am delighted to have you join me today when Jaime Jo Wright is back. And it's so much fun because if you watch the first episode with Jamie, you know that she and I have absolutely nothing to talk about.
Oh,
But since she was here, she's released two books. But we're going to start by talking about the book that just came out at the beginning of this month, April 2023, The Vanishing at Castle Moreau. Now, maybe
mm.
I'm saying that too French. Am I saying that too French,
No, you're
Jamie?
saying it perfectly. It's perfect. And it is French in origin. So even if you were saying it too French, that's perfect.
Well, and as I was looking at this, I was like, ooh, a castle. And then I was like, but this is in Wisconsin. And I'm sorry, but I don't think Wisconsin and think castles. So is this based on
No.
a real place or how did you come up with the idea?
Well, interestingly enough, there are castles in the Midwest. Now, I will say they're not as magnificent as some that I've been to in Europe, so we won't, give them that element of grandeur. But there are some people who were immigrants from Europe who wanted to bring some of the old world to the Midwest where they settled. So there are some castles. There's a castle in Ohio. There's a castle or two here in Wisconsin. There's one near Lake Michigan over on the side of Michigan. So it's not necessarily uncommon. Um, but this one is, specifically, I did make this one a fictional one just because I wanted to put it in a different area and I wanted to have complete artistic license.
Yeah. And that's always the fun of being a fiction writer. You know, you can
Right.
take something, you can be inspired by
Exactly.
something that may exist or may have happened in real life, and then you can spin it off and
Right.
see all kinds of fun and mischief and mayhem. In your case, lots of mayhem. So
Mhm.
is there a real castle that could have served as the underlying inspiration for Castle Moreau?
I did visit, and I'll probably botch the name, but Castle Neuschwanstein in the Bavarian, the Black Forest in
Yeah,
Germany.
Neuschwanstein.
Yes, yes, thank you. See, you know how to pronounce it. I don't. And I mean, obviously that castle is magnificent and way beyond anything that I put in the book. But there were elements of the castle when I was touring it and I was walking through, and it was a self-guided tour. So I felt like I was able to just let my imagination go. And some of the halls there are darker. The
Mhm.
outside looks like the Disney castle outside, and then you go inside and all of a sudden it's almost oppressive in certain areas and shadowy and secretive. And so I really drew on a lot of that when I was writing this book.
Well, and one of the things that I love about Neuschwanstein, and I've only been there once, and it was a long time ago, and it was one of those days like you always see the photos, and it's all this light, and they're surrounded by the Alps, and it's beautiful. And of course, the day
Mhm.
we were there, you couldn't even see it until you were like literally on it because it was raining, and so
Oh
it was
no.
in clouds and all of that. But when we got into it during World War II, that was one of the places that the Nazis stored the art. And
The
so
art.
then you have after the war, the monuments men going through, and it was one of the staging locations for sorting the art, for returning it. And so I always think of course, like that aspect of it,
Right.
but there's such a mixed history to it. So you use that as some of the inspiration, but
Mhm.
what's the rest of kind of the behind the scenes, pull back the curtain behind the vanishing?
Ooh, this may become one of my favorite books. I'm not sure. It wasn't intended to be my favorite because I've always loved The Curse of Misty Wayfair, but
Mhm.
um this one was fun because it started briefly. A friend of mine sent me an article on one of the world's first female serial killers from the 16th century, 16th, 17th century. And she was a Hungarian countess. Um, and she was supposedly known for killing quite a few, if not a couple hundred young women. And so essentially the story was these women would just vanish, and eventually the countess started drifting into the gentry, and then once the important women started to disappear, there was an investigation and they found out that she had her own thing going on behind these castle walls. So I got to thinking, how interesting would it be to write a Midwestern castle setting, which is already weird in itself, and then throw in this story of, from 1800 all the way up to present day, this string of women who vanish, and it's always on the property or around or potentially in Castle Moreau, which is originally the home of a gothic authoress in the light of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein and and she's known for being Aura Moreau is the old name of this classic author, and people think maybe she was behind and is still behind the Vanishings even in present day. So
Ooh, very gothic and very in line with how your other books go. Uh, and it always makes me wonder because when, I write suspense,
mhm,
but to me, gothic is even more like involved, and because it's the setting and it's like
sure.
everything about the story has that kind of mysterious what's going on and where's it all
Mhm.
coming from. How did you decide that was the space that you were going to write in?
I it was honestly sort of an accident that I fell into it. I had always enjoyed some of the Gothic authors like Jane, the author of Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote The House of Seven Gables. I think I devoured that classic in 2 days. So I've always had an interest in it. But I was talking actually with Colleen Goebel, and she was like, you should write a split time story. She was the one that planted the idea in my head originally to do a present day with a past. And then I remembered thinking all the hours I followed my grandma around antique stores when I was a child, completely bored out of my mind until I started as a child to pick up an item. I'd pick up any item and then I would imagine who had touched it and what its story was. And so I kind of fell into the story of the house on Foster Hill, which was my first book. And it was a haunted house, so to speak, and there was a story around it. And after that, it just became just this natural curiosity to take something old and attach a mystery to it with those gothic elements where even the inanimate objects are a character and are important to the story. So I think it's just been a growing experience since I was little. I've just sort of evolved.
Because in one of your books it was a tree, in another book
Mhm.
it was a dollhouse, and this one it's got something to do with apple blossoms. I mean, you've got all these
Mhm.
different elements that come into play. And so I find it fascinating because when I come at suspense, I come at it from a different angle. And so it's just
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
fun to kind of think
Yeah.
about, you know,
Yeah.
we write in
They're,
kind of the same genre, but they're still very different.
they are very different and they both take their own unique elements of research and such. And with the gothic mystery elements, there's so much symbolism in everything. Everything hints towards something else. It's kind of biblical in the idea of the foreshadowing from one aspect, where the Old Testament hinted toward all these things that were going to happen in the New Testament. And I look at that, not that my book's biblical, that was weird, but I look at it from that concept, like the old stories are a foreshadowing of what's going to come in the present story, and one can't really survive without the other, and all these little pieces have to fit together.
Yeah, and they really do. There is this dependent connection
Mhm.
between the two. You can't separate them. And so
No.
it's not even like, because sometimes when you see those dual timelines, they really feel like you can read one storyline and then you can read the other one, and they're kind of
Right.
separate. And maybe there's a character that connects them. But with yours, there really is this interdependency
Mhm.
between the two. So when you were writing them, do you find that you have to kind of write them together, or do you write them, independently and then kind of weave them together afterwards? Or how does that plotting aspect come together for you?
Yeah, no, I have to write it the way that you read it.
Okay.
So as a reader, that's how I wrote the book too. And it's a lot like a movie in my mind. It just plays from scene to scene and scene changes. And it's very difficult to imagine writing them separately.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I think many people that's kind of how it plays out. But I
Yeah.
could see if I were to write it, I could see even at times doing one and then the other, especially if I
Mhm.
got stuck in one timeline to then kind of get going again. Or
Exactly. Yep.
but I haven't done that yet. So maybe someday I'll be calling you and going, "Hey, Jamie, I want to play with this. How
There
do
we
I get
go.
started?"
The next Kara Putman book. Be
Yeah, there
great.
you go.
Do it.
Maybe. So the one though that came out before this was Premonition at Withers Farm.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit about that one too.
Well, and that's such a juxtapose from a castle. So now we go back to a farm
Yeah.
and a cornfield. And that one really pulls out the essence of the farmland history of Michigan. And that one was fun because it came about. My friend and I were going through her chicken coop, and she showed me this old box of letters that she found hidden in her chicken coop from decades earlier, and they were innocent kids' letters, but I got to thinking, what would happen if you found letters of a killer who kept his journals about his victims and hid them in the chicken coop?
As you're writing these books and thinking these kind of plot lines and coming up with things, does he ever like tell you, I'm sleeping with one eye open?
I don't think so. He kind of just rolls with it. He assumes that he married somebody with a twisted mind, and my kids are even used to it, and they just kind of go with it too. So
Yeah. It is funny because every once in a while, Eric will be that way, where he's just jokingly be like, "Oh, you're plotting one of those again."
yeah,
You know, and he'll joke about, "Do I need to sleep with one eye open, or is everything going to be okay?" And I'm like, "You're fine. It's all in my imagination." But
yeah.
he'll be like, "Maybe I should leave a journal just in case." So
My kids are starting to adopt things. We'll go down the road, and no longer is it, oh mom, someone dumped their trash on the side of the road. It's, oh mom, what if there's a body in that black trash bag? So they're starting to pick up on some of the morbidness of their mother, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but
yeah. Yeah. So where do you like? So you've got, one that's set on a farm, one that was set up on like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and this,
Mhm.
I don't, was that the Cursive Wayfarer?
That was the Cliffs of Foxglove Manor.
Yes.
Yes.
Close to
Yes.
Foxgrove Manor. And then, this one that's set in Wisconsin. Does the setting come first for you? Does the what if on how you could have this kind of creepy Gothic angle, or does it kind of all come together for you at the same time?
The setting is usually something that oftentimes will come first, because it is such a critical aspect to the story. The story always seems to weave around, like you mentioned, there's a tree or there's a lake or there's a pond or something. And so that's usually pretty important. But it will grow as the story grows. And elements of the setting will either be subtracted or added depending on what I need for the story, which is one reason why I do a lot of fictional settings set in real places. So like Foxglove Manor, for example, is set up in the UP, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, on Lake Superior, but it's not a real house. It's not a real place as far as the actual location.
Yeah, because that gives you a lot of flexibility as you're like,
Yeah,
oh, the story demands this, or oh, I need to add this in and not
yeah,
be restricted.
exactly, exactly.
So when you imagine what's coming next, or are you working on your next book already?
Yeah, I've got another book coming out in October already that is available for pre-order. It's called The Lost Boys of Barlow Theater. And that one is actually based off of a theater in my hometown that was built by Al Ringling, who was one of the Ringling brothers. And he built this magnificent theater in this really small Midwestern Wisconsin town that mimics a lot of the European theaters. So it's got the Horseshoe Lobby and the Horseshoe Auditorium, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. But there's lots of ghost stories associated with it. And I actually pulled some of the actual ghost stories and put them into this fictional theater and have built that into a new novel. So it's not really Phantom of the Opera, and Lost Boys has nothing to do with Peter Pan, but there is a ghost story about boys that were lost in the walls and the ductwork of the theater that were supposedly never found, which is interesting. So we went playing with that idea, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun to write.
I have to admit, I did kind of go immediately to Lost Boys and Peter Pan. So,
This is a different set of lost boys, but regardless, they do kind of freeze in time as boys.
so a little more of the White City, Chicago Fair
Yes,
kind of lost.
yes, yes,
Ooh,
absolutely.
ooh,
And
creepy.
definitely has some vibes, and the cover should be out now by the time we have this podcast. So it's beautiful. It's very, very vibey of the European theaters, which is just gorgeous. So
Oh, I can't wait. So, but speaking of covers, the cover for the Castle, oh, I just lost it. The Castle of Lake Monroe or whatever. I
the
just lost.
Vanishing at Castle Moreau.
Thank you. I was like,
I
I'm
lost
getting
it too. I'm like, wait, what was that?
wait, what is it? And I was looking over here because I'm like, I had it pulled up and then I went to the other one. But the Vanishing at Castle Moreau is a beautiful cover. But one thing that readers don't often know is we get some input on covers as authors. Like I just saw one today for a book that I have coming out in April, or actually, I guess it's coming out in October. But we don't always have a lot of input. But you said this was one that you had some input on. So tell us a little bit about what that process was like. When you are working with your publisher, how do they go about kind of partnering with you on what the cover will look like?
Yeah, I usually answer a questionnaire that gives the artist an idea of things that are in my head is what I would envision being on the cover. So in this situation, I told her I'd really like to have something with a castle. I very often will provide her with a color palette because color for me, for every book, is really important. Each book I write has a color theme. That's a whole other conversation. But this one was lots of shades of pinks and grays, which is funny because pink is not at all my favorite color. So it was, she's like, are you sure? Are you sure you want pink? And I'm like, I do, because it fits with the story. And then we wanted apple blossoms. So when we got the cover back, the apple blossoms were a lot more prominent and there was a lot more of them. It looked very French and very romantic and not at all scary. It was a very beautiful cover. So I said, we need to make this a little bit more mysterious. And we settled on shrinking the apple blossoms because they are such a critical part of the story. This is very much a little girl dreaming of castles and heroes who grows up to find the castles maybe not as friendly, and it may not be the knight in shiny armor inside. And so that element of femininity in the rosebuds is just a picture of the dreams and hopes that we wrap up in fantasy when sometimes that's not how life turns out. So,
and it's gorgeous. It is absolutely a gorgeous cover. But it's still haunting. It has that haunting gothic feel to it. So, and I think that's the best covers come from that, where there's that back and forth and that give and take, and that feedback from the author who created the story. But then I'm not always the best when it comes to how that should be graphically represented. And so I know I always send lots of comps of, okay, here are what readers in this genre would expect to see. Here's what other best-selling books would look like, and to give some ideas, but then that back and forth. And it's so fun to see what designers come up with, because I am not a graphic designer.
Right.
And so it's really fun.
It's absolutely great. And my designer is phenomenal. In fact, this is the only cover I've ever asked for edits on. Every other cover that you've ever seen with my books is literally the first cover they've come to me with. And I'm, yep, that's good. I'll take it.
Well, and you've had amazing covers, just really spot on. So, well, this has been so much fun. Thank you for coming back and for telling us more about your books and your process. Is there anything else that you think readers should know as they're getting ready to run out and either purchase or pre-order the books that have come out in the last year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Pre-order. You can go to my website at jamiewrightbooks.com and sign up for my newsletter and get all the ins and outs there's of the special things. And I'm all over social media. So Instagram, Facebook, all of that would be fun to see you there.
And you have a podcast with Pepper Bathroom, Killers and Kisses.
We have it's Smooches and Stabs. Smooches and Stabs. That's okay. Killers and Kisses sounds good too, actually.
It does, but Smooches and Stabs is pretty fun too. I guess I was going off of she's all about the smooching books, the kissing books.
Yeah, Pepper's the romantic, and I'm the one that tries to darken things up a little bit. And I have another podcast too, which is Madlit Musings, where I do a lot of similar interviews with authors, and we really like to dig into spiritual topics there too. So it's super fun.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. And I wish you all the best with all these books, because you're fantastic and I love reading them.
Well, thanks for having me and bearing with my camera issues and the dirty laundry in the background. So
real life is an author, right?
Real life is an author, that's for sure.